Right here in the back of my trunk, I have the essential camping gear that I take on pretty much every trip. So these aren't the optional extras that you might take depending on the situation. It's really the core basics that you need in order to have a successful camping trip. So if you're a beginner looking for a starter list to get you going, or if you're an experienced camper and you just need a refresher or you feel like you're missing something and you can't remember what it is, then I think you're gonna find this video really helpful. We're gonna go into my trunk and we'll go through item by item. So let's get started. And here we go. I'm just gonna pull them down onto the tailgate so you can see what I'm looking at. And the first item here is, of course, a tent. And depending on the type of camping you're doing, you might need like a car camping tent that's a bit bigger or something lighter like a backpacking tent. But either way, you need a tent. And as an optional extra, you might also wanna take a tarp or a ground cloth. And if you're not sure exactly how those work, then I did another video where I go pretty in detail into how that all works, and I'll link to that here. And yeah, so let's move on. The next thing you're gonna need is a sleeping pad. That's kind of after you set up the tent, the next thing you're gonna set up, that's your sleeping pad that goes on the floor between the ground of your tent and the sleeping bag. And I mentioned that just because I know some people don't know that you actually need this. And you could take a sleeping pad like this one that's like an inflatable thermarest one, or you could do a cot, or you could do one of those foam sleeping pads that kind of look like yoga mats as well. So it's all kind of the same thing, and they have their own pros and cons, but that's another item you need. And then next up after that, you need a sleeping bag. And this is my, my backpacking sleeping bag. It's kind of in its big stuff sack here, so it's a little unwieldy. But as optional extras for this, in addition to just your sleeping bag, you may want to bring a pillow. Of course, this is a homemade pillow that my grandma made actually, and it just works out really nicely for camping size. And you might also want to bring, I might have a hard time fishing it out here, but I usually bring a sheet if I'm going camping in the summer, or some people also will take a liner. And so those are kind of optional add-ons. I don't really consider those as essential because you might not need them. And in a pinch, instead of a pillow, you could of course use like a sweater or something of that nature. So that's just something interesting to keep in mind. Okay, next up, we're gonna pull a couple of items actually out of this little bag. And I use this bag all the time on my camping trips to both organize and to keep dry. It's a dry bag to keep dry some essential items that I take on my trips. And so the first thing we're gonna pull out of here is something that's really important, and it is a first aid kit. And this might not look like much. This actually probably looks like kind of a funky first aid kit, but it's one I actually kind of put together myself with components and things that came from another kit. And so of course, if you want to buy a pre-made first aid kit, that's often going to work really well, and you can buy them from pretty much any major like big box store. And so you need a first aid kit of some kind. And then the other thing that I want to pull out of here is a classic, and that's going to be a pocket knife. And I like the multi-tool sort of classic Swiss Army knife because you get your basic knife, which, you know, of course, all pocket knives have the knife part to it, but you also get some little tools on there that can come in handy. Like I've used actually a can opener on a Swiss Army knife a few times for opening cans and things like that on a camping trip. And so having a couple of extra tools on a multi-tool, sometimes like a screwdriver is included, which might also come in handy. But at any rate, some sort of pocket knife or multi-tool is really important to take, and I take one on basically every trip. If you're liking this video so far, I encourage you to hit the like button for me. It does help my channel out a ton, and it doesn't cost you anything to do that. It's just a quick little tap to turn that like button blue, and I'd really appreciate it. Thanks. All right, the next category here is gonna be a little bit weird, and that's just because it's a bit of a choose your own adventure, because the specific items that you would take for this vary so much depending on the type of trip you're going on. And so basically what it is it's your choose your own adventure camp cook kit, basically. And what I have here, I'll just show you real quick, is I have my backpacking setup, and this is just a little pot cook kit from NSR. It's like lightweight cooking pots here. And then this is my Whisper Light International backpacking stove. So I'll just kind of show you real quick what this looks like if you haven't seen one of these before. But basically it's a stove that folds up, and then this is the fuel for it. If you are going car camping, you wouldn't necessarily need a backpacking stove, right? You could use something else, and this is where kind of the different options come in. So you could do like a bunch of your cooking over the campfire, in which case you would need to use firewood and something like a roasting stick. And so that's another thing that you could bring. And if you're doing just car camping, then you might want to bring like a big camp cooking stove that's like a double burner, like this one. Like this is one of those big double burner camp cook stoves. And if you're going on a trip where you like to kind of do a lot more cooking, then you could do a big one like this. You of course would need fuel for this as well. Or if you're trying to do all of your cooking over the campfire, then you could use something a little bit more like this. Or if you want to try something a little bit more sophisticated when it comes to cooking over a campfire, you could use like a cast iron skillet like this, something that's like a pan or a pot that is going to be safe to actually put directly on coals over the fire. And as a note, just generally, I wanted to throw this in there about cooking, is make sure that you bring like a spatula or like a wooden spoon or something to cook with, because that's something that gets forgotten really frequently. So whatever your cook kit is, make sure you have something appropriate that you can take with you. And depending on if you're doing over the fire or over a stove, you might be able to use like a silicone thing like this, or you might need like a wooden spoon or a metal spoon even, if you're afraid of like melting this over the fire because it's too hot. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And one more thing just to tack on to the end of the cooking kit portion, sort of the choose your own adventure thing still applies here. If you're staying long enough and you're going to be doing like enough meals and you can't just kind of pack everything up in a sealable container or something to then wash at home, you're going to need to bring some dishwashing supplies. So you'll need like a washcloth or scrubber pad. This is actually another homemade thing that one of my relatives made, so you're getting to see some fun homemade stuff today. But then of course you'll need some dish soap as well. This is obviously a ridiculously large bottle of Dawn. You could of course bring something much smaller if you had it. And depending on where you're going camping, you may also actually need to get biodegradable soap. So that's something to keep in mind. And then I just have a towel in here for drying stuff off. And then finally, as sort of the last item of the cook kit, choose your own adventure category, is trash bags. It's always really useful to have some trash bags, not only for trash, but they're also really versatile tools. And I did a whole video about different things that you can use trash bags for. I'll put a card in this video to that so you can check it out if you'd like to. Outside of the cooking utensils or the cooking supplies like the stove and whatnot, what you'll also need pretty much on every trip is going to be a mess kit, which is just sort of the camping or outdoorsy version, or even I guess it has roots in military terminology, but you're going to need a mess kit, which is basically going to be like a plate or a bowl, spoon or fork, maybe a knife, things like that, and usually like a cup or a mug of some kind. And this is my backpacking setup again, which is why some of these might look a little bit odd to you car campers out there. This is just like really lightweight stuff. It's a titanium spork, titanium mug, and that little orange thing in there is called a hot lips. It goes on the edge of the cup to make sure you don't burn yourself, because titanium holds heat really to kind of like an extreme extent. So if you put hot liquid in this cup, it's going to get super, super hot and you don't want to burn yourself. And so you put this little orange lips thing on there so that your lips can touch that instead of the metal itself. So anyway, you're going to need a mess kit of some kind. All right, next up, we're going to fish 2 more items out of my wonderful blue bag here. And the first one is going to be my little waterproof container of matches. So it might seem odd that I have a waterproof container that goes inside of a waterproof bag, and that's because I had the container first. But at any rate, you need some sort of matches or a lighter, for example, to start your fire, or your stove, depending on the type of stove you have. And inside my little container here, I actually have a couple things. I have a like a box strike pad for some matches. I'll show you that there. And then I have matches, of course. But then I also have like a flint and steel setup here. So this is, I guess, magnesium fire starter, which I use sometimes, mostly for fun, but that's a survival thing that you can use as well to, you know, kind of use that as a spark to start a fire. And then at the very bottom of this container, you might not even be able to see it, I stuffed some dryer lint down there because it's an exceptionally good fire starter to kind of get a flame going. That's also really small and easy to put in a little jar like this one. So anyway, that's my matches and fire starter kit in my waterproof container. And going back into the bag, the next thing that we need here is our headlamp. So a headlamp or a flashlight of some kind is really useful on a camping trip. Of course, you could use your smartphone. A lot of people have smartphones nowadays, and they almost always have a flashlight app or function on them. So you can, of course, use that. But I find the hands-free sort of aspect of having these headlamps is extremely useful. And so if you can spring a few extra bucks to get a headlamp for your camping trip, it's going to make you way, way happier than having to carry around your flashlight while also trying to like undo zippers and things like that. So if you can get a headlamp, I highly recommend it. All right, next up is the all-important toiletries. And For that, I have sort of my basic like toothbrush, deodorant, toothpaste, that sort of a thing. You can of course bring like medications or anything like that you would need. This is kind of all something I bundle together under the topic of toiletries. And I usually put that in a Ziploc bag like this to kind of keep everything together, but also keep everything clean. And then of course, you know, you probably, a lot of the times are also going to want to take some toilet paper just in case they're not going to have it at the campsite you're going to. And especially if you're going into the backcountry, you might need to bring your own toilet paper. And pro tip here, two things. Number one, you can typically hide a little thing of hand sanitizer inside the roll of your toilet paper so that they're always there together, because you often need them at the same time. And it's also a good idea to put it in a like sealed Ziploc bag, because there's nothing worse than like wet toilet paper that gets all grimy and gross before you even use it. So that's just something that you can do. Just put it in a plastic bag, throw some hand sanitizer in there, and you've got your little toilet kit ready to go. If you were going backpacking, you of course could take like a little shovel or trowel as well, but I'm assuming this is for car camping, so you probably won't need that. Next up, you're going to need, of course, a water bottle, or just water storage in general. I usually take this water bottle. It's a little 20-ounce one from Imbrava, and I really like this one. If I'm going on a camping trip, I sometimes just bring one, but I'll often bring two. And if there is no running drinking water at the campsite you're going to, you of course need to bring plenty of water. So you might need to bring like some big jugs of water to make sure you're going to have enough. So that's something you need to look at and prepare in advance, but this just kind of represents the category of water storage. Don't forget to bring that. All right, next up, you need to, of course, bring clothes. You need to bring like a bag of clothes, basically, and that all depends on how long you're going and what you're going to be doing while you're on your trip. And so I did actually a full video where we walked through all of the gear, including the clothes that you would need for a weekend camping trip. So I'm going to put a card to that up in this video so you can get a full clothing rundown if you'd like to. But I'm just going to call out one thing that people will often overlook, and that is simply to bring a rain jacket. And even if the weather says it's not going to rain and it all looks good, it's important to bring a rain jacket because weather can be unpredictable. And even if it doesn't rain, this will give you some peace of mind, but also it can serve as a windbreaker, which can be an important part of layering, which is a whole concept when it comes to preparing and packing for the outdoors. And I did a full video on that as well, which I'll also put a card to up here so that you can check that out if you want to learn more about how to dress in layers. Okay, next up is a really important one, and that is sun protection. So I've got some sunscreen here, also a hat and sunglasses, whatever you need to protect you from the sun. Basically, regardless of what time of year it is going to be really important, and I take something like this or some combination of all of these on every trip I go on. Okay, now I'm just going to do a bonus little speed round real quick of a couple of things you might not need on every single camping trip you go on, but that is oftentimes going to be really important. So first of all, I have just a map and compass here. This, of course, is going to be really important if you're going on any type of backcountry or hiking trip to make sure you don't get lost and stuck out in the wilderness. And so that's one thing. And then the other thing I have here is a cooler, and of course you would need the ice to go along with it if you have any food that needs refrigerated or kept cool in order to, you know, keep it safe and good to eat. And another thing that I want to mention that is not shown here is bug spray. You probably want to bring some sort of bug spray solution, whether it's just regular bug spray or some other thing to keep them away. And I also want to mention that you may notice that I haven't mentioned any like specific food to bring in this list. And that's because I don't really consider food to be gear, but of course you need to bring food on your camping trip. And so if you're not sure what you want to bring food-wise on your trip, then I would refer you to a playlist that I have that shows different cooking recipes for camping that you might really like. It's some of my favorite recipes, and so I'm going to put link cards up to it here and also in the description below if you want to check those out. If you've enjoyed this video so far, please do like it, subscribe if you haven't done that already, and I'll catch you next Wednesday for our next video. Bye now.